Gilded Lily by Rhevve. Summary. In the arms of the vampire he nearly killed, he cried. Or the aftermath of the amusement park conflict. Chapter 1. Don't Forget Me. Noe blinked awake cautiously. There wasn't much to feel besides confused and drained. He didn't have half a mind present to sort out how his teacher could be wrapped up in all of this, alongside Vanitas's brother, who he just found out existed. Hardest of all to process was the reality of their fight, creeping in through each aching bone and stinging gash. The physical remnants were beginning to fade through his convenient ability to rewrite the world formula, but he feared the mental scars would fight to stick around. Noe sighed. He turned his head to the right, taking in the scope of the damage their battle had caused. The amusement park lay in complete ruin, shards of ice and smoke taking place of the once merry attractions. He felt a tinge of remorse for all the families who'd made plans to visit the next day. Noe's eyes trailed to where Domi and John were huddled together, fussing over one another's wounds. This time, a sigh of relief. Domi was safe and relatively unharmed, and he knew he could count on John to protect her if things went south once more. His eyes continued to wander until they landed on Vanitas. His partner, friend, enemy was nothing more than a pile of clothes and blood on the floor. Noe had no idea where they stood anymore. He also had no idea if Vanitas was still alive. But if there's anything that evening had taught him, it was to not underestimate the resilience and ferocity of the human. Could he even be considered human anymore? The slow trickle of Mikhail's memories reminded him of the complex background that brought Vanitas to the point where he was now. But that wasn't the only factor that had sustained him during their fight. Noe was all too familiar with the effects of the Chasser tonic. Images of Astolfo, eyes burning crimson, trembling, lunging towards him with an inhuman burst of speed and strength, passed briefly through his mind. Roland's jade eyes, gleaming of hope and confidence, weaving Durandal's through vampiric onslaughts with ease. However, his battle with Vanitas had been nothing but a contrast to everything he knew. The human had been composed, silent, almost hollow, despite the numerous injections and wounds that pierced his skin. His eyes bore no feeling but despair. Now he lay still on the grounds of the amusement park. Noe was struck by the memory of a conversation they shared on the trip back from Jerevan. I almost feel bad for him. The first tonic overdose is no fun, Vanitas said, a knowing glint in his eyes. The human was entranced by the passing scenery that flew by their train window. But when he saw the way Noe's face dropped, he clarified further. Not that I was ever dumb enough to do that, but some of the other trainees, they would make bets to see who could take the most, Vanitas explained. All the winners really got was a sick pass from training for the next 2 weeks. One if they were lucky. Noe hummed thoughtfully in response. He was careful not to speak anymore and risk jeopardizing the opportunity to learn more about Vanitas' shrouded past. Anecdotes like these were few and far between, so he did his best to commit each to memory and store them safely in the shelves of his mind. The memories he gained through blood had always felt tainted, heavy with a stench of thievery. Therefore, he felt it was important to keep them clearly divided from those he was willingly given. Vanitas continued on, turning back towards the window. No concoction could be more obviously designed by a human. The more it lets you kill, the more it kills you. Noe didn't miss the flicker of regret that overtook the bright blue eyes. Noe! Domi's call pulled him from the memory. He sat up and waved her direction, hoping that it was enough of a signal to let her know that he was okay. She appeared satisfied, returning the gesture with a sad smile. one that told him they had much to talk about, but now was not the right time. He silently agreed. Unspoken words may have been what brought them here in the first place, but correcting that error would not fix the damage already done. "I must return Lady Dominique to Master Luca. He must be worried sick by now," John said, setting down her gauntlet and waving over to crouch beside Noe. She whispered sternly, "Will you be able to take care of him?" Noe was shocked by the intensity of her words. For someone who acted as if they cared nothing for Vanitas, she sounded awfully concerned. However, before he could even begin to answer, she clasped his shoulder tightly and leaned forward to the point where he could feel the warmth of her breath tickling his ear. "What would he do for you?" With that, she shot up and stomped away, not even casting a glance backwards to the vampire she's left speechless. Vanitas trembled fiercely. His body would no longer listen to him. His arms limp by his side and head pressed uncomfortably against the ground. Raging emotions chiseled away at his marble facade, carving the nestled form of a damaged young child for all to see. He was being unwillingly laid bare at a time where all of his willpower was funneled into helping him stay alive. Vanitas squeezed his eyes shut tightly, with the slightest hope that the ground would open its mouth and offer him a sweet respite away from all that had transpired. No such grace was given. A strong hand scooped him from underneath and swept him into a firm embrace. For a tender moment there was no sound or sensation other than the breathing and beating of their hearts alike. He let himself think that maybe, just this once, this was the better option of the two. "Vanitas! Vanitas!" The increasingly worried calls pulled him from the tranquil. He merely groaned in response, worried that words would break the seal he was holding together so persistently. So many feelings and memories he'd pushed so deeply under the surface had been violently ripped from his grasp. He was vulnerable, exposed, but most of all he was hurting. Tears welled precariously in his eyes. "Vanitas," the voice repeated sternly. "We have to leave. It's not safe here." "It's not safe anywhere," Vanitas' mind argued. "Everyone knows now. There's nowhere to run." "Stop," Vanitas pleaded. The word was less so spoken that it was breathed as a sob forced its way out of his chest. Tears flowed freely and tremors racked his frame as the last of his carefully crafted walls came tumbling down. In the arms of the vampire he nearly killed, he cried. Chapter 2. Keep Your Promise. Noe was prepared for indignance, defiance, or just about any of the other traditional Vanitas reactions to affection. What he didn't expect was the outburst of tears that quickly mixed in with the blood soaking his sleeves. It didn't last long before the human slipped into unconsciousness. This one was very unlike the temporary lapses he'd had over the course of the evening. He would not stir to any prod or call, and a ghostly pallor descended upon his features. Noe was no doctor, but he knew Vanitas needed medical attention, and he needed it fast. He gently raised the limp form up to his chest in a bridal-style carry, taking care to gather the blue book and blood-stained knives that were scattered nearby. Vanitas' head rolled securely into his collarbone as he stood to leave. Noe was unnerved by how small the man felt in his arms. He'd carried the other plenty of times before, but never had it come with such little resistance. If the situation had been any less urgent, He might have even found it endearing. The route back to the hotel was familiar, but the midnight air felt crisper on his tongue. Ghosts of their past seemed to peer at him from each alleyway they crossed. Michael's taunts goaded them along. "You really don't know anything, do you?" From the airship to the catacombs to the grounds of Jedavon, he had been so focused on observing the Book of Vanitas, but ultimately failed to learn anything at all. A glance down at Vanitas in his arms brought a sense of relief. At least he had succeeded in one thing. Noe launched upwards onto the rooftops. He decided that entering their room through the window would be best, avoiding any possible scrutiny from the hotel staff and noisy doms. He ducked inside deftly. The room was as undisturbed as they had left it, save for a small plate of cold food and first aid equipment set neatly on the edge of the bed. Noe silently thanked Mademoiselle Amelia for her foresight. He gently set Vanitas, who had yet to stir, on the bed and sat beside him. The silence was deafening. He could feel the blood pounding in his ears, the sweet, sweet aroma of Vanitas's blood pouring into his nose, lighting all of his senses on fire. Now was not the time. Noe put his head in his hands and took a few deep but shaky breaths, steeling himself for the night ahead. With a huff, he stood up and turned on the lights, casting a forlorn look at the plate of food next to his injured partner. Vanitas would definitely need it more than him, but that didn't stop his stomach from growling at the sight. He placed a hand on Vanitas's forehead, recoiling at the intense heat that came upon the contact. Noe realized then that he wasn't sure what to do at all. Sure, he knew how to patch up a wound or two, but he was far from a doctor himself. Vanitas was always the one to take charge of their ailments with that painfully smug attitude of his. Confidence gained from the knowledge of a past Noe now understood. Once more because of memories that Noe had wrongfully stolen, not earned. A moan from Vanitas pulled him out of the spiraling thoughts. Noe turned in surprise to stare into wide blue eyes, glazed over with pain and fever, and cursed himself for being distracted from the task yet again. "Vanitas?" he said, hesitating. "What can I do?" A gloved hand reached up to cup his cheek. "Luna?" Vanitas couldn't believe his eyes. "I killed you. You're dead. How are you here? Why? Was it all just a bad dream? What happened before? Or was this a dream?" Trying to decipher what was going on, where he was, and what brought him there was impossible. Thoughts were jumbled and clumped together like mud, clinging to his cloak and dragging him down as he waded through the marsh. Moving was just as impossible. Pain arced through his whole body, freezing his muscles in place, but it was okay because he didn't have to move. Luna was there, and Luna would take care of him. They always did. A groan of pain escaped his lips, and Luna turned to face him hurriedly. Their face was different this time. Their trademark look of serenity was replaced with one of grave worry, and their eyes that normally shone a crystal blue akin to his own were replaced by a deep purple. Vanitas pushed through the agony to lift his arm and touch their face. "Luna?" Before he could question it further, his stomach convulsed violently. Vanitas lurched upwards, regretting the movement immediately as the world began to spin, shifting between a hotel room and cabin in the woods, threatening to tumble his insides into the outside. He squeezed his eyes shut and covered his mouth with a whine. Strong arms lifted him to his feet, worsening the vertigo and nearly dipping him back into unconsciousness. "Come on, stay with me," Luna said, guiding him forward steadily. When they reached the bathroom, Vanitas collapsed on the toilet. He knelt in symbolic prayer to the porcelain bowl before emptying the contents of his stomach inside. The heaving was awful, continuing long after there was anything left to offer. Once the spasms finally passed, he leaned backwards into Luna's arms. Fingers combed through his hair tenderly. They murmured soothing words into his ear. The sick fog clouding his mind slowly began to ease, and Vanitas allowed himself to be lulled into a much more peaceful trance, giving up his body and mind to their protection alone. It didn't matter if Luna was strangely back from the dead, or had purple eyes, or a voice much deeper than he remembered. All that mattered is that he felt safe in their arms once again. For whatever reason, the alterations to Luna's appearance only made them feel more welcoming, as if the warmth of another had joined them in watching over him. Someone with bright purple eyes, a soothing voice, and a heart big and brave enough to carry out the weight of his heavy soul. Chapter 3. Please forgive me. Hearing the Vampire of the Blue Moon's name felt like a stab to Noe's heart. He knew he could not provide the same comfort that Luna would bring, but if Vanitas' delusions helped him feel safer, Noe would do everything he could to not disturb them. When the vomiting had ceased and Vanitas had fallen back into his arms, feverish and trembling, it took all of Noe's strength to not break down and cry. It was his fault that Vanitas ended up in this state, pleading for help from the one vampire who couldn't be there. He attacked first. He triggered Vanitas' hypnosis. He invaded Mikhail's memories. With Dominique's life at stake, there didn't seem to be any other option, but all of those decisions and deductions were nonetheless his own. Maybe Vanitas could have found another way. Maybe they wouldn't have ended up like this. But there was no use in second-guessing now. As much as Noe could question his actions, they had already been made, and he should only focus on mending their repercussions. So why was it Vanitas in his lap, mumbling apology after apology? And why were they addressed to him? "Sorry, Noe." Breathless, begging, remorseful. "Why are you saying sorry?" Noe thought, horrified. "What do you have to be sorry for?" He hugged the human tight and let the tears fall, unable to hold himself together any longer. The grief and guilt mercilessly gnawed away at his soul. For just a moment he was a kid again, speechless, as the head of his best friend fell to the ground beside him. But this time he could do something. This time he can help. Ignoring the mumbles and his own tears, Noe hoisted Vanitas up over his shoulder and stood. He flushed the toilet, closed the lid, and sat Vanitas down on top of it, checking to make sure he wouldn't fall over before dashing out to the bed to grab the first aid kit. His heart raced. It felt as if the moment he took his eyes off Vanitas, the human would simply vanish. But of course, when Noe returned, Vanitas remained limp, head hanging, poised on the seat of the toilet. It struck Noe that he didn't actually know which outcome was more worrisome. Noe grabbed a washcloth and ran it underneath the sink, scrubbing some of the blood off his own hands and face before rinsing it again. He knelt down in front of Vanitas. Noe pushed Vanitas's head up slightly, careful to avoid eye contact with the half-lidded sapphires that threatened to draw tears from his own eyes again, and he dabbed the cloth along his face. Vanitas's pale skin was coated in grime and lacerations. A particularly deep gash along his cheek was still trickling blood, but the others seemed to have stopped long ago. The complex nature of his vampire-infused blood must have some accelerated healing effects as well. He re-rinsed the washcloth before pressing it against Vanitas's forehead, hoping the cool water would draw out some of the heat from the fever. Noe held it up with his left hand and sifted through the first aid with his other, ignoring the way it flared up the lingering pain from the battles at Jedavon. He eventually found a packet of fever reducers. Taking away the cloth, he tilted Vanitas's head upwards more, opening his mouth to place the pills and squeezing water from the cloth inside in the hopes that it would help wash down the medicine. Vanitas swallowed weakly, his eyes rolling around and muscles twitching erratically, perhaps lingering effects of the tonic overdose. Noe continued on with his task, cleaning out the worst of the wounds and ignoring the whimpers of pain his actions produced. "What would he do for you?" John's words rang like bells in his ears, a mantra that kept him going, because this is exactly what Vanitas would do for him, no matter what pain it brought him. Because that's exactly who Vanitas was, a selfish martyr who strove to solve the suffering of the world by making it his own, who took up a campaign against the good in his world by offering it up to everybody else. A broken boy who had been hurt, betrayed, and left behind by everyone that was supposed to protect him, who was desperately searching for answers that the cruelty of the world wouldn't dare give. A tireless doctor who knew every malnomen and ailment in the books, who hoped that by saving others he could one day find a way to save himself. The more he learned, the more Noe wished he could help him to see it through. And so, through the still hours of the night, on the cold tile of the bathroom floor, Noe patiently cleaned and covered every streak of red that decorated Vanitas' skin. He was an artist, diligently replacing the angry strokes he had painted earlier with white patches of care. Noe gently removed the ragged black cloak to continue onto his torso. The bandages and gauze became his unsaid words, wrapping them tightly around Vanitas' exposed chest. "I am so sorry." Another roll. "I will protect you." A scrub from the cloth to clean it off. "Please forgive me." Hours passed before Noe finally finished his masterpiece, stepping back to observe the handiwork. Vanitas had long since slipped into a comfortable slumber, bandaged chest rising and falling in rhythmic peace, the color slowly returning to his features. There was nothing more Noe could do. He took Vanitas into his arms once more, savoring the way the human's body fit perfectly against his own, and walked them out into the bedroom. Noe gently tugged Vanitas into the bed, then turned to lay down himself, exhausted to the bone. The rattle of the plate of food beside him normally would have excited him, but it was easily ignored as he also fell into a deep sleep, snoring loudly and clutching his pillow close. It was likely that Vanitas wouldn't be able to recall any of the events that took place after their departure from the amusement park. Calling out for Luna, begging forgiveness in Noe's arms, sitting exposed on the seat of the toilet. It would be a wonder if Noe remembered it clearly either. But the unspoken connections and promises that followed each time they clasped each other's hands would always remain. Noe's insatiable need to understand, Vanitas's innate desire to elude understanding would keep them locked in a playful lover's dance till the very end. However, no matter what came next, they would no doubt face it together. When words couldn't explain how much they cared for each other, but actions always would. Grimoire and shield, human and vampire, doctor and student, gilded lily and artist.